Please welcome Alexander Inführ.
Thank you. Yeah, that was most of my presentation. Yeah, I just leave it like this for now. Let's start. This is a talk about remote code execution in LibreOffice. We're the macro support. And actually, we'll talk about multiple vulnerabilities in this case. First, some information about me. My name is Alex. I'm called InsertScript on Twitter. I have a blog, and you can also reach me via email. I work for Q53 as a penetration tester now for many years. I'm mostly doing a lot of research in browsers. I spent way too many years on PDF, in my opinion, but that basically got me started with doing research in file formats in general. And I don't know, when you spend so many years with PDF, you kind of want to use that power you achieved because it's not so easy to read, to explore additional file formats, basically. When I'm not doing research, I play Counter-Strike with people in the room, and in my opinion, we waste way too much time on it. You know who you are. And additionally, I like really terrible B-Shark movies. Most people know Sharknado, but I mean movies like Six-Headed Shark Attack, Sharktopus versus Whale Wolf, or Ghost Shark. Sadly, they are not sponsoring me for saying that. But in case you want to talk about B-Shark movies, I'm your guy. Before we get started, I only have 30 minutes, and because of the setup, even less. I will release a blog post, let's say tomorrow, but I'm not sure if I actually managed that. But it will contain proof of concept and descriptions and exact versions for all the vulnerabilities I'm mentioning today. And of course, in case you have any questions, you can just talk with me. And I hope you want to join in the file format specification, guys, and also try to find your own vulnerabilities after this talk. But let's see. So, LibreOffice and macros. Why even spend any time on LibreOffice? It all started with the image tragic vulnerabilities, which described quite a lot of cool vulnerabilities in the image magic library, which is used a lot on the server side to convert PDF to PNG or SVG files to whatever. And one of the executables which is used by ImageMagick is GhostScript, and Tavis or Mandy from the Google Project Zero team found, I don't know how many vulnerabilities in GhostScript, and because it's used by ImageMagick, you could attack ImageMagick. So I decided to have a look what other executables are supported by ImageMagick, and one is S-Office, which is the file either for LibreOffice or OpenOffice, depends what you've installed. And because it's open source, you can modify the file format quite easily because it's XML based. It seemed like an easy target. So I got started. I downloaded the file specification, only part 1, because there were part 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and some additional ones, so I decided part 1 seems right. And it basically contained a lot of XML elements, and I just started to look which one looked interesting, and suddenly there's macro support, and I didn't know that LibreOffice supports macros. So I decided I focus on LibreOffice and the writer, and I want to get an example file which actually uses a macro, because then I can explore, check it, open it in my editor, and actually read what's there. My first attempt was to read the specification and create it by hand. That failed terrible. Then I decided, why not just Google how to use the feature, and with the graphical user interface, and then you have a file. The idea was good, but I was distracted and did something else for quite some time. and kind of forgot. And then last year I was at BrewCon, and I was too lazy to go to any talks, and I decided, hey, maybe I find now how to actually create one of these macros and use them. And to be honest, it's super simple, and let me show it how you can do it. To get started, where is it? I'm blind, yeah, here. Okay, I hope you can see that. All you had to do is click Insert, then a hyperlink. You type whatever you want, doesn't matter. And then you had to click, that was fast, the super small icon here on the side. And this basically implements the whole macro support. It complains because of the Java runtime, you will see later why. And now you could say, okay, mouse, when the mouse is over the object, I want to execute a macro, and here's a nice list of all the pre-installed macros, by the way. I use Hello World Python, you assign it, create, okay, okay. And now when you move the mouse, oh, Hello World in Python. So that means I had finally a structure, so a simple working file. And yeah, sadly it was so simple, but it took me way too long to find it. So how does the structure look like? It's really straightforward. You have an event, which in this case is mouse over. So when the mouse is over the object, it gets executed. And then we have something which looks like a local file path, then a $sign. And then we have two parameters called language and location. And these two are actually quite interesting. Language defines the macro language you want to use. LibreOffice supports 5 different languages in macro. It supports BASIC, which never worked for me. For Bean Shell and Java, you have to install the Java runtime environment. JavaScript never worked for me, and Python. And I used Python for a really simple reason, because when you install LibreOffice, it actually has its own Python environment. It completely ships Python 3.5 or whatever is the latest one. So that means Python macros always work. And then the location parameter is also really important. There is user, share, and document. User is just when you have like your own macros in your user profile. Then there is share, which means you want to use one of the pre-installed macros. And then is document. Document means the macro is inside the document. And when you use share, at least in the past, it didn't matter how high the macro security option was set. It would execute the macro. So there was no warning dialog or anything. When you use location share, the macro will get executed, which is awesome. So, but we have location share here. So that means Python samples, table sample.py must be on the local file system somewhere. And yeah, it is. So basically, it's when you install LibreOffice, as an example, in the local C share, you can find the file there. And the $create table is just a function inside this macro. Additionally, I discovered that you can pass parameters as well, and you could traverse to any file location. So it was not necessary to actually specify a pre-installed macro. You could just traverse down to any other file and execute it via Python. But there was a problem, because what Python file do you execute without requiring the user to download another file? And I just wanted to have a proof of concept which just works. So I wanted to reference a Python file which is always there and achieve remote code execution. And the solution wasn't that terrible to find, because I looked at all the Python files which are shipped with Python core 3.55. And one of the files is called pydoc.py, and it has an awesome function called temp file pager. And it's super short. That's all it does. And the first parameter you can ignore. But when you look at the CMD parameter, you will see it will pass CMD to OS system And this will just basically execute CMD, the command, in the default operating system shell. On Windows, CMD, on Linux, your shell. So all you had to do now, basically, modify the path, traverse to this file, define temp file pager, the function you want to reference, and specify the program you want to execute. And this looked like this. Let me see. So, let me slow it down, sorry, because I have to explain something. So now the file is rendered. You don't see any hyperlink because the whole page is a really big hyperlink with the color white. So you don't see it. I don't know, really clever stuff. But as soon as you move your mouse now, inside the document, the macro gets executed, and yeah. So that was in 2018. Thank you. Then I got lazy again, but I published a blog post about this issue. Because the path traversal was fixed. But location share still meant the macro security doesn't help you. Very high, or whatever the highest option is called, doesn't protect you. And another researcher read my blog post, found it interesting, and decided, what happens if one of the pre-installed macros actually has like a vulnerability? Because you could still do the same thing. As soon as basically the malicious document is open in LibreOffice, it will execute custom code. So he decided to have a look. And one of them is called Libre logo. Does anybody know what Libre logo is before looking at the slide? Because I had never heard of it. And it's super weird, in my opinion. But it's basically a Python-based logo environment stuff. But in the end, all the macro is doing is applying some regular expressions to pass the commands to actually Python code. And then will pass the result to an exec call, which is basically like evil. And the commands are extracted from the document body, basically. And you don't even have to read the regex or anything. You could literally just write Python code. So it looked like this. Once again, we have the mouse over event. We reference the macro we want to execute. And here we literally just write evil os system calc.exe. I modified the payloads a little bit so it works all the time properly, because I had some weird issues. You will see another example in a second. I had to create my own proof of concept for this vulnerability because there was a 10-day time frame between the CVE being released and blog post. And yeah, I couldn't wait, so I read the CVE and created my own proof of concept, basically. Then the original finder published his finding, and that was his example. So you can literally see import os system calc.exe. And when he moves the mouse over the run hyperlink, it will execute these commands. That was all he did. Okay, LibreOffice decided, yeah, that's not good, but we can't remove the macro because they're actually using it in the graphical user interface. So they implemented two protections to fix this issue. At first, they tried to detect the Libre logo path, and if it's getting detected, it will get blocked. And then they modified the Libre logo macro itself, the code. And before they would execute the potential insecure exec function, they checked if the document body contained any event handler, like the mouse over event. And if it would detect that, it would stop execution again. The first check was really simple to bypass. So instead of Libre logo, you write /Libre logo, which still referenced the local file. And for the second check, it only checked the document body, but there's also the header and the footer. So I just moved the link to the header, increased the header over the whole page, and increased the link again, and then it worked again. Yeah, of course, I spent actually quite some time to read the code and understand to get this bypass working, but somebody else found a way cooler bypass, and it did not require any user action at all. And it's basically because of the 10 days between the CVE being released and the official blog post. He's called Ludlow. At least that's the only thing I know. I have no idea what his real name is. And he also wanted to recreate the original issue from Niels. And while he recreated the issue, he bypassed the two protections as well. Realized that, and he created a Metasploit module. And his bypass is really simple, because what he did, he instead of using a mouse over event or anything like that, he just used another event, which is the DOM load event, which basically means it's rendered. So, and then the macro will get executed. And he didn't have to change anything of the payload or anything, because by moving this to the top with the DOM load, he bypassed all two protections at once. I'm not totally sure why it bypassed the Libre logo check. I assume it was too early, maybe. I'm not totally sure. And the check in the macro was bypassed because it's not in the document body, because it's at the beginning. Okay, so they had to fix it again. What could they do? This actually was quite interesting at first to play with. They really started to aggressively check for Libre logo for the string. Like no matter where the document, when you use it in a macro, even when you have like a Libre logo b / stop execution. Lowercase, uppercase, doesn't matter. As soon Libre logo is present, stop execution. At first you could think, yeah, that sounds good. There's a problem. That's not good enough on Windows. On Windows, you have the feature which is called 8.3 file names, or short file names, or SNF, apparently. And that's apparently from Windows DOS times back then. It's the limitation that a file name can only be 8 characters long, and the file extension only 3 characters. Nowadays, maybe you know that files can be longer, file names. But when you create a file with a longer file name, Windows will store an 8.3 version for that as well, and you can use both names. So when you have a file name called 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, it will be stored as 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 tilde 1, and both names work fine. And you can use the cmd dir command with /x to show the actual name. But Libre logo is 9 characters long. So, I'm wondering, so when we look the name up, instead of Libre logo, you could write librel tilde 1 / and then the same for the macro name. And that still works for the Windows API, it doesn't matter. But the Libre logo string is no longer there. And that was the last bypass I found. But just to show you what changes I had to do, this was Ludlow's original bypass, where he used the DOM load event, and all I had to do was this. And once again, when you open the file, it would execute calc.exe. Sadly, for the server side, I started actually to explore this because of the server side, because I actually wanted to attack ImageMagick. But then I discovered a lot of problems. Although macros still work, you have a problem with the events, because most events don't work, or basically are just ignored in headless mode. The headless mode is basically the server-side version, because you don't need the graphical user interface on the server side, so everything runs in headless mode. So there's no mouse over event or anything like that. But there are still some events actually supported. So in theory, you could try to reference a macro The problem is they get passed at least 2 or 3 parameters by default. And that means you have no longer control of the parameters, which gets actually passed to the macro. So there's like some weird integers. When they get passed to the shell, what should happen? Nothing. And also, most macro functions do not accept like 4 parameters. So Python will complain, yeah, I have literally no idea which function you want to call with this amount of parameters. So it fails. I'm not totally sure that there isn't a way to actually exploit this properly on the server side. Maybe when more people join in, we find a way. But so far, I am not aware that there is like a proof of concept out there which you could use, sadly. But maybe one of you finds one. So what can you do? Maybe you think, just delete the Python environment. Yeah, try to do that. LibreOffice will just crash. Even in headless mode, when you remove the default Python environment, it installs, it gives up. What you should definitely do is just remove all default macros. If in case you need Libre logo, I just have the question why for you, because I don't know why. And actually, one really good thing now, which they changed, thankfully, and I'm not sure which version exactly, but at least in the latest version and one version before that, it's like 6.3 something, the macro security was changed. So location share no longer means that the macro gets executed, which is, in my opinion, a really good change. I think when you set it lower, it will inform you that a macro will get executed and asks if you really want to do that. So when you set it very high, it's a really good choice, so then it stops the execution. And maybe there is a bypass. I haven't had any time to explore that, so maybe. And additionally, you can use Docker as well to remove, I mean, of course, when you actually achieve code execution, you can try to attack Docker as well and then maybe escape. But in my experience, when you use Docker with, and there's just LibreOffice installed in there, it takes away a lot of the resources which you could maybe abuse during an attack, because there is not only macro support, there are additional functions and features I haven't talked about today, which could also be used on the server side, like remote file linking and stuff like that. Here are some links, a blog post again, where we will publish all this. Also, the last link is from some guys who started to explore LibreOffice in the headless mode with other features, what you could do. It's really interesting. And yeah, any questions? Maybe you want to ask about OpenOffice, because I get that a lot. I'm like, oh, talk about LibreOffice. What about OpenOffice? With OpenOffice, it's interesting because thankfully I checked before I gave this presentation, because they actually released a new version in September this year. And I tested all the vulnerabilities. You cannot abuse the Libre logo remote code executions because they don't have the macro. But my path traversal vulnerability from 2018 is still in there. It still works. In case you're wondering if I haven't told OpenOffice, I have. They were part of the communication when I originally found this vulnerability, which is basically default when you communicate with LibreOffice. OpenOffice gets the vulnerabilities as well. I'm not totally sure why they didn't fix it. So maybe you encounter OpenOffice in the wild, so you can play with the path traversal issue. And that was basically it. As you can see, it's not that difficult to find code executions, at least in my opinion. And yeah, any questions?